He stopped mid-step, watching her scrub tiny jeans in a cracked porcelain sink. She didn't see him, but in that moment, she changed everything he thought he knew about love, dignity, and himself. "Welcome back, my beautiful family. I just want to thank you for spending this time with me. It truly means the world. Go ahead and click subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I love hearing your stories too. And tomorrow, I've got something just as wild, just as moving waiting for you. Tap the notification bell so you won't miss it. Trust me, you'll want to be here when it drops. Now, let's begin." The steam from his coffee curled upward like question marks he didn't yet have answers to. Daniel Royce sat in the corner booth of a weathered diner on the edge of Westbrook, his notepad open, pen resting in his hand. On paper, he was a construction supply clerk, low pay, modest apartment, nothing special. In truth, he was the CEO of Royce Holdings, a sprawling empire of logistics and property, hiding in plain sight. He wasn't here for the thrill of disguise. He wasn't here for charity. He was here because after 12 years of boardrooms, market projections, and yes men, he realized he didn't know how anyone outside his circle lived. So, he'd stripped away the title and the tailored suits to see the world raw. The bell above the diner door jingled. The cold air swept in a couple arguing quietly, their words muffled by the hiss of the coffee machine. Daniel looked up briefly, then back down to his notes. Rent late again. Bus drivers know everyone's name here. People laugh without checking their phone first. Across town, on the third floor of a building with the paint peeled like sunburned skin, Emily Carter was coaxing her son into his winter coat. Owen, 5 years old and endlessly curious, clutched a toy fire truck with wheels that stuck. "Hold still, buddy," she said, tugging the zipper past a stubborn snag. Her hands were red from scrubbing his only decent pair of jeans in the kitchen sink that morning, but he didn't notice. He was chattering about the fire truck and whether the firefighters had lunch breaks. She checked her watch, already late for her second job at the diner. She brushed a strand of hair from her eyes, tied it back, and mentally calculated what was left in her checking account. If the numbers didn't work, she'd find a way. She always did. Emily's life was built on quiet, relentless survival. She had no family nearby, no child support she could count on, and no illusions about fairy tale rescues. Her world revolved around Owen, and every choice she made, every skipped meal, every double shift, was for him. That evening, as the sun sagged into the horizon, Daniel walked through Westbrook's narrow streets, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his thrift store jacket. He passed shuttered storefronts, a bakery with one light still on, and the faint sound of someone's TV leaking through an open window. The air was sharp, carrying the metallic scent of impending snow. He turned into the small laundromat at the corner of Oak and Grant. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Half the machines were out of order, their coin slots taped over with handwritten broken signs. The hum of 2 working dryers filled the room. That's when he saw her. She was bent over a cracked porcelain sink near the back wall, sleeves rolled up, hands submerged in soapy water. A small pile of children's clothes rested on the counter beside her. Her movements were methodical, almost rhythmic: scrub, rinse, wring. The skin on her knuckles was raw, the water clouded with detergent and faint blue dye. The boy Owen sat nearby on a plastic chair, his fire truck clutched in both hands, watching his mother like she was performing something sacred. Every so often, she smiled at him, a quick, fleeting smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel lingered near the door, uncertain why he didn't just leave. Something about the scene stopped him. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in her work, or the way she carried herself without complaint. He'd seen luxury washed, pressed, and delivered by invisible hands. He'd never seen love scrubbed into fabric like this. Emily noticed him. Her eyes flicked up, scanning him, tall, lean, a stranger who didn't seem to belong here but wasn't obviously out of place. She gave a polite nod, then returned to the clothes. Daniel hesitated before walking toward the vending machine. He dropped in a couple of coins, the clunk of the mechanism louder than necessary. "Dryers out of change?" he asked casually, glancing her way. "They're out of a lot of things," she replied without looking up. Her voice was calm, with a trace of fatigue that wasn't from the day alone. It was the sound of someone used to pushing past tired. Daniel didn't press. He took his coffee from the vending machine and sat down at a table, pretending to check his phone. In truth, he was studying the way she wrung the water from a tiny pair of jeans, shaking them out before folding them neatly in her bag. When she finished, she helped Owen into his jacket, tucking his fire truck under his arm. "Ready to go, buddy?" she asked. He nodded, yawning. She caught Daniel's gaze for a second, just long enough for him to see a flicker of guardedness, the kind you carry when you've had to defend your space too many times. They left together, the glass door swinging shut behind them, the sound of the wind rushing in to fill the space they'd vacated. Daniel stayed seated, staring at the now empty sink. He didn't know her name, her story, or why this small moment felt heavier than a boardroom decision. But as he sipped the bitter coffee, one thought lingered: he wanted to see her again. Have you ever witnessed a stranger doing something so quietly powerful that it stayed with you? Tell me in the comments. Sometimes, the smallest moments change the biggest parts of us. The next day, Daniel found himself walking down Oak Street again. He told himself it was just coincidence, that he liked the quiet here, the smell of bread drifting from the bakery. But his steps slowed as he neared the laundromat, and before he decided consciously, he was pushing the glass door open. The air inside was warm and thick with the scent of detergent. The same broken out-of-order signs were taped to the machines. And there she was again. Emily stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, a faded sweatshirt hanging loose over her frame. Owen was perched on the same plastic chair, swinging his feet, fire truck balanced on his knees. Daniel walked toward the vending machine, feeling oddly like an intruder. He inserted coins and pressed the coffee button, though the bitter taste from yesterday still lingered in memory. "Hey," he said, glancing her way. She looked up briefly. "Hey. Still broken." He gestured toward the row of silent washers. "Still broken." Her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but enough to suggest she appreciated the attempt at conversation. Daniel took a sip of coffee and leaned lightly against the counter. "Do you always hand wash here?" She paused mid-scrub, her hands still in the sudsy water. "Depends. If the machines work, I use them. If they don't," she glanced at Owen. "We adapt." He nodded, sensing she wasn't going to offer more. But he couldn't stop himself. "I don't think I've seen anyone do it with that much care." That earned him a sideways look, curious, slightly wary. "They're just clothes." "No," Daniel said quietly, "they're his clothes." Emily froze for a heartbeat before going back to her scrubbing. "Well, no one else is going to take care of them." Something in her tone, steady but edged, told him this wasn't a conversation she had often. He changed tack. "What's his name?" "Owen." Daniel crouched slightly, so he was on the boy's level. "Hey, Owen. Cool fire truck." Owen's eyes lit up. "It's a ladder truck. The ladder goes up, but it's stuck right now." He tried to show Daniel, but the ladder barely budged. Daniel reached out. "May I?" The boy handed it over without hesitation. Daniel examined the plastic hinge and with a small adjustment, the ladder popped free. Owen's face broke into a grin. "You fixed it." Emily looked up from the sink. "He's been asking me to do that for a week. Guess you've got the magic touch." Daniel handed the toy back. "Guess so." For a moment, the air between them softened. The sound of water running, the hum of the dryers, Owen's quiet engine noises as he rolled the truck across his knees, it felt warm. Human. Daniel didn't realize how long it had been since he'd lingered in a moment without rushing to the next agenda item. "Thanks," Emily said, almost as an afterthought. Her gaze stayed on the jeans she was rinsing, but the word carried weight. He nodded. "Anytime." They didn't speak much more, but when Emily gathered the damp clothes into her bag, she glanced his way again. "You here often?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe I will be." Later that night, in his small apartment, Daniel found himself replaying the exchange. The way she moved, efficient but not rushed. The way her eyes softened when she looked at her son. There was no performance, no attempt to impress. She simply existed in her truth, and it was more compelling than any power presentation he'd ever seen. She didn't usually talk to strangers at the laundromat. People came and went, sometimes staring a little too long, sometimes offering pity she didn't want. But there was something about him, something unhurried, almost gentle. She caught herself thinking about the way he crouched to talk to Owen, as if the boy's words were worth his full attention. That mattered. Most adults spoke to Owen like he was background noise. Still, she reminded herself, kindness didn't mean trustworthiness. She'd learned that the hard way. People could have good manners and bad intentions. The following afternoon, Daniel was back. This time, he brought 2 paper cups from the bakery, coffee for himself, hot chocolate for Owen. "Thought you could use this," he said, holding the second cup out toward Emily. Her brows lifted. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said simply. She accepted the cup, taking a cautious sip. "Thanks." The warmth of the drink seeped into her cold fingers. For a moment, she allowed herself to just enjoy it. Daniel leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. "You live nearby?" "Couple of blocks." "Nice area?" She smirked faintly. "Depends on your definition of nice." He smiled but didn't press further. He could sense her boundaries, and oddly, he respected them. The old Daniel, CEO Daniel, would have pushed, extracted information, and controlled the conversation. Here, he let her lead. When she finally gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. "Thanks for the hot chocolate." Owen liked it. He nodded. "See you around?" "Maybe." She walked out, Owen skipping beside her, the fire truck clutched tight. Daniel watched them go, wondering why the sight felt like a thread tugging at something deep inside him. Have you ever met someone whose smallest gestures, fixing a toy, offering a drink, left a bigger mark than you expected? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes it's not the grand acts that change us, but the quiet ones. For the next few days, Daniel didn't go to the laundromat. It wasn't that he didn't want to, it was that he wanted to too much. The pull to see her again felt dangerous. He told himself he was here for observation, to better understand life outside his penthouse. He wasn't supposed to get involved. Still, she lingered in his mind. Emily, sleeves rolled up, hands submerged in water, face calm but eyes tired. Owen, smiling like his whole world fit in a plastic fire truck. They were in his thoughts during morning coffee, in the pauses between spreadsheets, in the silence of his one-bedroom apartment. Across town, Emily noticed his absence too. Not that she'd admit it, not even to herself. He was just some guy, a stranger who happened to be kind to Owen. That didn't mean anything. But still, when she went to the laundromat and saw the empty vending machine corner, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't name. Curiosity? Disappointment? No. She told herself it was relief. Less distraction. On the 4th day, fate intervened. Emily had been working a split shift at the diner when the kitchen sink backed up, flooding half the floor. She stayed late to mop, which meant missing her bus home. The next bus was 40 minutes away, and the wind bit through her thin coat. Owen was with her, bundled as much as possible, but he shivered against her side. She was standing at the corner when a voice came from behind. "Need a ride?" She turned. Daniel stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, expression careful, like he knew she might say no. "I don't get into cars with strangers," she said evenly. "Fair." He nodded toward the lit bakery across the street. "Then maybe I'll just wait here with you until the bus comes." Her brows knit. "Why?" "Because it's cold. And the wind's getting worse." Owen looked up at her. "Mom, my toes are freezing." Emily sighed. She hated asking for help, but she hated seeing her son suffer more. "All right," she said reluctantly. "Just to our street." The car was an older model, nothing flashy. The heater rattled but blew warm air. Owen relaxed almost instantly, clutching his fire truck and watching the streetlights pass. "You really weren't kidding about the cold," Daniel said. Emily gave a short laugh. "You get used to it." They drove in silence for a bit. He wanted to ask questions, about her job, about her life, but every time he opened his mouth, he stopped himself. When they reached her building, she unbuckled Owen and turned to him. "Thanks for the ride." "Any time," he said, and meant it. She hesitated a fraction of a second before nodding. "Good night, Daniel." The next week, they bumped into each other again, this time in the cramped corner store down the block. Daniel was grabbing milk and bread. Emily was picking up instant noodles and a small pack of apples. "You stalking me?" she asked, a teasing edge to her tone. "Maybe you're stalking me," he countered. Her mouth quirked, but she turned back to her basket. Doubtful. Owen spotted him and ran over. "Hi, Daniel." He held up an apple like it was a treasure. Mom says we can make apple slices tonight. Daniel crouched down. That sounds like a solid plan. Emily's gaze softened briefly, then she caught herself and looked away. We should go. That night, Emily replayed the meeting in her head. She hated how easily Owen took to him. She hated that she didn't really hate it. Daniel seemed genuine, but she knew better than to trust appearances. The last time she'd let someone in, they'd walked away and left her picking up the pieces. Daniel had his own mental tug-of-war. Part of him wanted to lean into this connection, bring her coffee again, ask about her day, maybe learn what kept her so guarded. But another part knew he was lying to her by omission. If she knew who he really was, the CEO whose company probably owned half the warehouses around here, would she see everything differently? Would she see him differently? The tension grew with every unplanned encounter. A nod in the laundromat, a passing wave in the street, a brief exchange at the store. Nothing dramatic, but the air between them always seemed charged, like both were holding back more than they said. One evening, as Emily loaded damp clothes into her bag, Daniel appeared in the doorway. She looked up, the corner of her mouth twitching. You're here again. I could say the same to you. This is my laundry day, she said simply. And mine, he replied. They shared a small, quiet smile, one that said we keep ending up here, don't we? Have you ever tried to keep your distance from someone, only to find life kept throwing you back together? Tell me your story in the comments. Sometimes resistance only makes the connection stronger. The first snowstorm of the season hit Westbrook like it had been waiting all year. By mid-afternoon, roads were slick, sidewalks buried in drifts, and the wind was howling through alleyways like a living thing. Daniel had planned to spend the evening in his apartment, reading over the latest market reports his assistant had secretly forwarded to his alias email. But just as he poured himself a cup of coffee, the lights flickered, then went out entirely. A text buzzed on his phone, building alert, heating and power outage. Temp shelter set up at community center. Across town, Emily was reading Owen his favorite firefighter book when her own apartment went dark. The heat had already been spotty all week, but now the radiators were stone cold. She wrapped Owen in 2 sweaters, pulled on her boots, and headed to the community center, which she'd heard was running a generator. The snow was knee-deep in places, the wind biting through her coat, but she pushed forward. Owen clung to her side, his cheeks red from the cold. The community center was buzzing with noise, neighbors chatting over paper cups of soup, children sprawled on blankets, elderly residents huddled near the space heaters. Emily found a spot in the corner and began setting out a blanket for Owen when she heard a familiar voice. You made it. She looked up to see Daniel, carrying a paper tray of 3 hot chocolates. Snow clung to his hair and jacket. What are you doing here? She asked. My building's out too. He handed 1 cup to Owen, 1 to her. Thought you could use this. She hesitated. You keep bringing me drinks. He smiled faintly. Maybe it's my thing. The hours stretched. The generator hummed in the background. Owen played with a group of kids in the hallway, while Daniel and Emily ended up sitting at the same folding table, eating lukewarm soup from styrofoam bowls. This storm's something, Daniel said. Emily nodded. Westbrook winters always are. You get used to it. You say that about everything, he said with a small grin. That's because you do. You adapt or, she shrugged. You don't make it. A few hours later, a volunteer announced that the storm wasn't letting up and anyone without heat should stay overnight. They brought out cots, and soon the large gymnasium looked like a patchwork quilt of blankets and sleeping bags. Emily settled Owen into his sleeping bag and sat on the cot beside him. Daniel was a few feet away, unfolding his own blanket. This is cozy, he said lightly. Emily chuckled. If by cozy you mean freezing and full of strangers. Exactly. Later, when the kids were asleep and the lights dimmed, Emily found herself whispering across the space between their cots. So what's your story, Daniel? You always hanging out in laundromats, helping random women with broken toys. He smiled in the dim light. Maybe I'm just curious about people. That's vague. Maybe I like vague. She rolled her eyes but couldn't help a small laugh. Fair enough. Around midnight, the wind rattled the windows so hard that Owen stirred, shivering. Emily pulled him close, but the thin shelter blankets weren't enough. Without a word, Daniel stood, crossed the space, and draped his own heavier blanket over them. "You'll freeze," she protested quietly. "I'll be fine," he said. "He won't be if he gets sick." Something in her chest tightened at that. She wanted to tell him she didn't need saving, that she'd handled worse on her own, but the truth was, she was grateful. For the first time that night, she let herself relax, Owen's small body warm against hers, Daniel sitting back down on his cot just close enough that she could see the outline of his shoulders in the dark. By morning, the storm had passed. Snowdrifts glowed in the sunlight outside the gym windows. The shelter buzzed with people packing up. Daniel carried Owen's blanket to the volunteer drop-off, then returned to help Emily gather her things. "Thanks," she said as they stepped outside into the crisp, bright air. "For what?" "For the blanket. And for not making it weird." He smiled. "You'd know if I made it weird." She shook her head, laughing softly, and they walked down the icy sidewalk together until their paths split. That night, back in their separate apartments, both of them thought about the same thing, how close they'd been without really meaning to, how it had felt, surprisingly easy. Have you ever been thrown into a situation where you were stuck with someone you didn't expect, and it changed how you saw them? Share your experience in the comments. Sometimes being forced together reveals truths we'd never see otherwise. The storm had left Westbrook blanketed in white, but life carried on. Sidewalks were shoveled into narrow corridors, buses hissed along icy roads, and the laundromat's broken machines sat exactly as they had before, mute and useless. Daniel was already there when Emily arrived one afternoon, Owen in tow. He was leaning against the vending machine, sipping coffee like he'd been waiting for her without meaning to. "Afternoon," he said casually. "Afternoon." She set her laundry bag on the counter and began filling the sink. Owen plopped onto his usual chair, fire truck in hand. "Daniel, the ladder's stuck again." Daniel grinned and crouched down, fixing it with practiced ease. "There you go, Chief." Emily glanced over her shoulder. "You're good with him." "I like kids," Daniel said simply. "They're honest. No boardroom politics." Her brow furrowed slightly. Boardroom politics. He mentally kicked himself, but shrugged it off. Figure of speech. They worked in parallel, her scrubbing and rinsing, him sipping coffee, until Daniel's phone buzzed. He stepped aside, answering in a voice she'd never heard from him before, confident, clipped, commanding. "No, tell them we're not moving forward at that valuation. If they want in, they adjust the terms." "Yes, I'll have the final draft on my desk tomorrow." Emily froze mid-rinse. Desk? Valuation? Those weren't words from a construction supply clerk, or whatever she'd assumed he did. When he hung up, she kept her eyes on the water. "You don't exactly sound like a guy punching a time clock." Daniel hesitated. "I do some consulting. Side work." Her tone was unreadable, but she didn't push further yet. Later that week, the tables turned. They were sitting in the corner booth of the bakery, Owen working on a coloring book, when Daniel noticed a small worn keychain on the table beside Emily's coffee cup. It was shaped like a tiny fire helmet, the paint chipped, the key ring barely holding together. "Your son's?" he asked, picking it up. Emily reached for it quickly. "No, mine." She turned it over in her hand. "Fire helmet, does it mean something?" Her gaze drifted to the window, where snowflakes tapped softly against the glass. Owen's father was a firefighter. Or at least, he was training to be. We were 19. He didn't stick around. Daniel stayed quiet, sensing she didn't talk about this often. "I thought we'd build a life together. Then one day he just didn't come home. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad, that I'd figure it out. And I did." She took a sip of coffee, her voice steady but her fingers tightening around the keychain. "Haven't seen him since." Daniel's chest tightened. "That must have been a lot." "It was," she said plainly. "Still is. But you don't get to stop just because life doesn't go to plan." They sat in silence for a moment, Owen humming quietly as he colored. Daniel wanted to tell her everything, about who he really was, about the fact that he could make her life easier in 100 ways. But looking at her now, proud and unbowed, he knew that wasn't what she wanted. She didn't need saving. She needed someone to stand beside her, not above her. "Emily," he said softly, "for what it's worth, I think you're incredible." She met his eyes, and for a split second, her guarded expression slipped. Careful, Daniel. Compliments make me suspicious. He smiled. Good. Keeps me on my toes. That night, back in his apartment, Daniel sat at his tiny kitchen table, the hum of the fridge filling the quiet. He thought about the way Emily had held that keychain, the steel in her voice when she said she'd figured it out. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting, every single day. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt a pull stronger than his own caution. He wanted to fight alongside her. Have you ever learned a truth about someone that completely changed the way you saw them? Did it make you feel closer, or more cautious? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the past explains everything. The week after their conversation at the bakery, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no grand confessions or obvious turning points, but there was a subtle ease now. When Daniel showed up at the laundromat, Emily no longer looked surprised. When Emily came in and saw him already there, she didn't pretend she hadn't noticed. One Thursday evening, Daniel was standing outside the bakery with a bag of takeout when Emily and Owen turned the corner. Long day? He asked. Double shift, she said. Feels like my feet might file for divorce. Daniel chuckled and held up the bag. I accidentally ordered too much Chinese food. Want to help me fix my mistake? She gave him a skeptical look. Accidentally. Completely unplanned, he said with mock sincerity. Owen tugged at her sleeve. Please, Mom. I love noodles. Emily hesitated for only a moment before sighing. All right. But only because he loves noodles. They ended up back at Daniel's modest apartment. It was small, sparsely furnished, and spotless, a little too spotless for someone living alone. Emily noticed, but said nothing. They ate straight from the cartons at his tiny kitchen table, Owen giggling when Daniel tried, and failed, to use chopsticks. You're hopeless, Emily said, shaking her head. Harsh but fair, Daniel replied, switching to a fork. After dinner, Owen discovered a small stack of board games in Daniel's closet. You play? The boy asked, wide-eyed. Only when I'm trying to lose, Daniel said, sitting cross-legged on the floor as Owen set up the pieces. Emily sat on the couch, watching them. She told herself she was only staying because Owen was having fun, but the truth was, the sound of their laughter did something warm and unfamiliar in her chest. Later, when Owen was happily absorbed in building a Lego tower, Emily found herself speaking more openly than she'd meant to. I used to love nights like this, she said quietly. Just home food, no rush. What changed? Daniel asked gently. Life. Work. Bills. You start running and forget how to stop. Daniel nodded, his eyes holding hers. Maybe you just need someone to remind you. Her lips curved slightly. And you think you're that someone? I'm willing to audition for the part, he said with a small grin. When it got late, Daniel walked them home through the quiet, snow-dusted streets. The air was crisp, and their breath came in little clouds. At her building, Emily turned to him. Thanks. For dinner, and for letting Owen win. Daniel smirked. Who says I let him? She shook her head, smiling despite herself. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Emily. The next week, Emily returned the gesture. She invited him over for dinner, mac and cheese with frozen peas stirred in, the kind of meal that was cheap, filling, and somehow perfect. They talked while Owen built forts out of couch cushions. Emily told him about the diner regulars, about Owen's latest school project, about the neighbor who always played the same song too loud on Sunday mornings. Daniel told her about odd jobs he'd done, skillfully omitting the boardrooms and corporate deals. But he did share small truths. How his father had been distant, how he'd always felt more comfortable observing than participating. That explains the laundromat lurking, she teased. He laughed. Maybe. By the time Owen was asleep on the couch, their conversation had shifted into that quiet late-night rhythm where words slow and silences feel comfortable. Sometimes I think, Emily began then stopped. Think what? That I forgot what it's like to trust someone. Her eyes met his. And that scares me more than being alone. Daniel's voice was soft. Maybe trust starts with small things. Like letting someone fix a toy truck. Or sharing noodles. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, She nodded. When he left that night, Daniel felt something he hadn't in years. Not just attraction, not just curiosity, but a pull toward something real. Something worth risking for. When was the last time someone made you feel unexpectedly safe? Was it something big, or a series of small moments? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes trust builds in whispers, not shouts. It started with a headline. Emily was wiping down the diner counter when her coworker Jenna slid a newspaper across the laminate. "You seen this?" Emily glanced at the page, not really paying attention, until she saw the photo. Daniel, dressed in a tailored suit, stepping out of a sleek black car. The caption read, "Billionaire CEO Daniel Whitmore spearheads expansion deal." Her stomach tightened. She read the first paragraph. Words like merger, investments, Whitmore Enterprises. Not construction supply work. Not side consulting. When Daniel walked into the diner that afternoon, she didn't greet him with her usual small smile. "Emily," he said, noticing her expression instantly. "What's wrong?" She set the paper down between them. "You want to explain this?" Daniel froze. "I was going to." "When?" Her voice was sharp. "Before or after I made a complete fool of myself thinking you were normal?" "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is you sitting in a laundromat pretending to be someone else, letting me tell you things I don't tell anyone, when you've been lying the entire time." Owen appeared from the back booth, clutching his coloring book. "Mom? What's going on?" Emily's jaw tightened. "Nothing, sweetie. Finish your drawing." Daniel tried again. "Emily, I didn't lie about who I am. I just didn't tell you everything right away. I wanted to get to know you without the money getting in the way." "Congratulations," she said coldly. "You got to see how the rest of us live. Was it entertaining? A nice little social experiment." His chest ached at her words. "It wasn't like that." The bell above the diner door jingled as a couple walked in, but Emily didn't look away from him. "You should go." "Emily." "Now." Her voice cracked on that one word, but she kept her chin high. Daniel left without another word, the bell jingling again in the deafening silence that followed. That night, Emily sat on the couch with Owen asleep beside her, the little fire helmet keychain dangling from her fingers. She replayed every moment, his careful questions, his apartment, the way he'd never really answered when she asked about his work. She'd been right to guard herself. She'd known people left when things got complicated. And rich men? They lived in a different world. She couldn't afford to step into it. Daniel, in his penthouse suite across town, sat alone at his desk. The city light stretched below him, but all he saw was her face, hurt, guarded, closing the door on him. He'd thought holding back the truth would protect what they had. Instead, it had destroyed it. For the first time in years, he canceled his meetings the next day. He wandered through the city, aimless, ending up at the laundromat. It was empty. He stood there for a long time, staring at the cracked porcelain sink where it had all started. The sound of the water, the smell of laundry soap, these things had been hers, and for a little while they'd been his too. That night, he picked up his phone more than once, ready to call her. But each time, he put it down. If she thought it was all a game, words wouldn't fix it. Have you ever found out someone wasn't who you thought they were? Did you walk away, or give them a chance to explain? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is where trust is tested the hardest. The diner felt different without Daniel's shadow crossing the threshold. A week passed. Then two. Emily kept busy, double shifts, Owen's school projects, laundry at the sink, but in the quiet moments, his absence was loud. She hated that she missed him. Hated more that Owen asked about him. "Is Daniel coming for noodles again?" he asked one night. Emily kept her eyes on the pan. "Not this week, bud." "Did he move?" She swallowed hard. Something like that. Across the city, Daniel was pacing his office, ignoring the stack of documents waiting for his signature. He'd told himself to let it go. She'd made her choice. But every deal, every boardroom handshake felt hollow compared to the way she'd smiled over takeout cartons, the sound of Owen's giggle when he won at board games. His assistant, Linda, knocked on the door. "You've been staring at that skyline for 20 minutes. You okay?" Daniel hesitated. Do you think it's possible to ruin something by telling the truth too late? Linda tilted her head. Depends. Are you asking if you should fix it? He looked out the window again. I don't know if she'd listen. Then the question is, will you regret not trying? That night, Daniel sat in his car outside Emily's building for almost an hour. Lights flickered in her apartment window, shadows moving, her cooking, maybe, or Owen bouncing around. He could go up, knock, say everything. Or he could drive away and keep her memory neat and unbroken. He started the engine, then turned it off. Emily, meanwhile, was sitting at her kitchen table, a bill spread in front of her. The rent had gone up again. She ran a hand over her face, exhaustion pressing in. Her mind wandered to the Chinese takeout night, to the way Daniel had walked them home in the snow. She remembered the sincerity in his voice when he'd said, "Maybe you just need someone to remind you." She'd told herself he'd been playing some rich man's game. But what if she'd been wrong? What if he'd just been afraid of what the truth would do to them? The next day, Emily found herself at the laundromat. She wasn't there for laundry, she just stood inside for a while, staring at the sink. It was where they'd met, where something had started before she even knew it was starting. And she realized, she wanted to hear his side, even if she didn't like it. That evening, Daniel finally made his choice. He walked into the diner just before closing, his coat dusted with snow. Emily froze at the counter. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said quietly. "But I couldn't leave it like that." Owen peeked from the back booth. "Daniel." Emily held up a hand to her son. "Owen, stay there." Daniel's eyes didn't leave hers. "I should have told you sooner. I wanted to be sure you were seeing me, not the company. But I see now that waiting hurt you more than the truth would have." She crossed her arms. "And you think that makes it better?" "No," he said simply. "But maybe it makes it worth trying again, if you want to." She studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she reached for a rag and wiped down the counter, buying herself time. "I'm not promising anything," she said at last. "But maybe I'll listen." Daniel nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "That's all I'm asking." 2 nights later, Emily stood in the diner's doorway after closing, coat zipped, scarf wrapped. Daniel was waiting outside, just like he'd promised. They walked without speaking, their boots crunching softly in the snow. He led her toward the small park by the river, where the street lamps cast warm halos over the benches. "I grew up with money," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "More than I knew what to do with. But I also grew up in rooms that felt cold. I thought if I kept my guard up, I'd never be disappointed. Then I met you." Emily kept her hands in her pockets. "At the laundromat." He smiled faintly. "Washing your son's clothes in the sink because the machines were full. I remember thinking you looked too clean to be in there," she said, a hint of a smile tugging at her mouth. Daniel's tone softened. "That day, I didn't see someone struggling. I saw someone fighting for their kid. And I didn't want you to look at me and see just the money, the headlines. I wanted you to see me." They stopped near the railing, the river glinting in the lamplight. "I should have trusted you with the truth," he admitted. "I'm sorry, Emily." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she sighed. "I've spent so long expecting people to leave, I don't even wait to see if they might stay. Maybe I wasn't fair either." His gaze searched hers. "So where does that leave us?" Emily took a deep breath. "We start over. No secrets. No pretending to be someone else." Daniel smiled, small at first, then warmer, brighter. "Deal." They stood there a moment longer before he glanced at her, half teasing. "Do I get to take you both to dinner again? No fake accidents with extra food this time." She laughed, the sound lighter than he'd ever heard it. "We'll see." A month later, the laundromat was busier than usual. Machines whirred, soap scents filled the air, and in the corner sink, Owen stood on a stool, rinsing out his muddy soccer jersey. Emily leaned against the wall, watching him. Daniel walked in carrying a bag of takeout, real noodles this time. "Thought you two might be hungry," he said. Owen grinned. Perfect timing. Emily met Daniel's eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel guarded. She felt home. They ate together on the folding table, laughing as Owen described his first goal of the season. Daniel reached over once, brushing his fingers against Emily's hand. She didn't pull away. Later, as they walked home, snow beginning to fall again, Emily thought of that first night, how everything had started in the most ordinary place, with the most unexpected person. Sometimes, she realized, love didn't come as a lightning bolt. Sometimes it was a slow, steady warmth that refused to go out. Do you believe trust can be rebuilt after it's broken? Or once it's gone, is it gone forever? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes, the ending isn't about starting over, but starting again together. And that's how a simple moment at a laundromat turned into a love story neither of them saw coming. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You're the reason I can keep sharing stories like this. If you enjoyed this one, there's another story waiting for you, just as emotional, just as unexpected, so don't miss it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when the next chapter of Love and Hope goes live. I can't wait to share it with you. Thank you.